The Edo last election almost forecloses the possibility that with the current INEC, with the current structure and the current judicial setup, many people, many reasonable people, would argue that there's no chance of removing a government that is not performing in 2027. And so I think that even if it was very urgent in 2022-2023 to fight for electoral reform, it's actually more urgent now that there should be a coalition of civil society and political parties, especially opposition political parties, to take seriously the demand of real, not peripheral, real electoral reform. We're going to share our thoughts about what that real electoral reform means in a second. But let me say that the real point for us is Nigeria does not have all the options available to it. That's for real. Anybody tell you that we have is joking. If you watch the political events in the last couple of weeks, and if you also read the Guardian newspaper editorial of 2 days ago that the presidency reacted sharply to, what it points to is the fact that there is now, and there should be now, serious concern about the safety of our democracy. No matter what happened, if citizens can block military vehicle and be urging for military takeover, the truth is the only attraction of democracy is that twofold. One, that democracy provides incentive for good performance. So democracy, through its peculiar incentive that people in office can be removed, help them to focus on promoting the well-being of citizens. So democracy's only merit, or two of its merits, is that somehow, through that mechanism, it can create good outcomes. The second merit of democracy is that democracy can stabilize a polity. So if people are disputing on the right to govern and have free and fair process, then they will not invest in self-help and violence. They will invest in strategy to convince the people to keep an eye on the governing elite, to criticize them, so that they too will replace them through peaceful process. And that's what the Constitution talks about, democratic, that nobody should take over power except by democratic means. So if elections are no longer free and fair, if there's no longer confidence that the electoral system can allow you to change government peacefully, what will happen? Citizens will resort to unconstitutional means of getting to power. It's simple. And we can't close our eyes to what's happening across the West African continent. That we are surrounded by countries that failed to have free and fair election, and the result was military rule. That's a fact. That's a fact. That's what happened in Burkina Faso. That's what happened in Niger. That's what happened in Mali. That's what happened in Guinea at some point. The moment nobody has confidence in the electoral system, then it's a matter of when before democracy is uprooted. That's the fact. So it doesn't matter whether Guardian was right or Princess was right, we have to deal with that. And so that's why we are saying that at this point, Nigeria faces a danger that the last Edo election, at least for those of us who are still struggling with the 23 result, Edo election forecloses to many people the prospect of this INEC under this condition running free and fair election. So we articulate, so we look at some of the things that should be done. Historically, we have always had electoral failure, but some opinion would say that it's now aggravating. And again, so we now want to look at what are the basic proposition. First, we're looking at institutional change. Institutional change requires that when you manage, so you look at, when you look at institutional change, you look at not just the law, but how the legal reform sits into the institutional framework. So, Uwe's report, as early as, immediately after the Yar'Adua's electoral success in 2007, Yar'Adua set up the Uwe's report. And the Uwe's report did a comprehensive job. One of the funny things is why the political elites collectively rejected that report. Not just Amadi, Jonathan, who was then PDP president, when Yar'Adua died, failed to implement a very reasonable. They spent money, brought the best of Nigerians, scholars, political scientists, practitioners, to sit together, and they did a deep work reviewing the crisis of Nigeria's electoral system. And they made some brilliant findings around context, why is election in Nigeria always flawed? And they located it primarily at the doorstep of the electoral manager. And they made a point. It's not about your faith in credible election does not rest on only the integrity of the electoral managers. No, that's a wrong way to construct a society. You don't construct social outcomes on the basis of presumed character of role occupants. You construct it first on the integrity of the institutional framework, which you can then match with credible people. So the Uwe's report says, first thing to do, dismantle INEC as composed, create a different electoral body. Now, there are multiple models of electoral reform. If you look at, keep going. If you look at, next slide, my friend. Okay. So if you look at, no, go back. Okay. So if you look at the electoral system, there are multiple models that the Uwe's report recommended. One of those models we used to have is the government control model. You have the model around where government appoints electoral managers. You have the model where independent electoral managers whose job will be to manage elections in a way that's objective. Now, our own proposition in Abuja School is that we should take INEC's Uwe's recommendation with some amendment. Okay, so another one. So if you look at the independence of the regulator, we talk about the first model is the independent non-partisan model. So in this model, the electoral body is independent of the executive branch of government in terms of appointment, management, funding, and the members are non-partisan. The second model is the independent partisan model, which requires that although the body is independent of the executive branch, its members may represent political parties, though the chairman may be. So in this model, all the parties might be represented in the electoral body. The third model, the judicial model, where the electoral body is independent and dominated mostly by judicial officer, and finally, the government model. Now, the Uwe's report accepted the the independent non-partisan model. It recommended merit-based recruitment for INEC chairman and members. Merit-based, you apply. Equivalent of Judicial Service Commission maybe will be involved, or even the National Judicial Council will interview, recommend to Council of State, 2-3 people, and the Council of State, the President, they will now appoint and send to Senate for confirmation. In other words, the presidency has no role in that process. Now, what we think, and the Uwe's report, many people argue that perhaps taking the president out entirely might violate the Constitution. And of course, so Nwabeze came in on that. Debate around it is whether you should remove from the constitution the so-called federal executive body. So INEC will not be part of the federal executive body. INEC will be a national body so that the president does not exercise authority. Now, our view at Abuja School, it's a complex discussion we had here. The paper, we have the paper, they're bringing it so you can go through it, is that we can retweak the INEC, the Ways model, allow the president to still do appointment, but appointment will be like routine, like foreclosure. There will be a competitive merit-based recruitment like the Ways reported. At the end of the day, the president has maybe 2 persons submitted after they have gone through screening for him to just routinely. So it's not a case where the president can appoint anybody from anywhere recommended by his friend or by himself. Now the idea here is that Jonathan accepted this point and made it clear after he left office. It's only Nigeria, among the developed economies in Africa, that presidents appoint electoral umpires. It's not done anywhere. A president who has incentive to win an election the next time, a president whose aides themselves have incentive to continue in office. So it doesn't even matter the patriotism of the president. Those appointments are basically going to be partisan. And the current INEC is a partisan INEC. It does not matter what anybody thinks. Everybody there, you might be lucky to appoint people who refuse to be partisan. Or certain political dynamics might change things. Jega, for example, was appointed by a president who probably at the beginning of his career felt he needed to appear coming from a minority, requiring the control of the majority to support him, had incentive to appoint somebody who's a northerner, a Muslim, to counterbalance. And he said he wanted somebody who would be independent. But as you can see, in the 2026 election, some people in his party were angry at that man who appeared independent because they now saw the political cost of doing that. And again, there was also the wave of power shift. So even if the guy was a saint, he probably did not have political incentive to support the government in power. Not very clear. So we can't use that exceptional, exception case to make a case. The case is that every person a president appoints would likely support that president to win again. Because he would have appointed somebody more disposed to them. Today, it's actually worse because the current INEC has been more political hacks have been appointed into its leadership. So it's actually silly, collectively stupid to expect this INEC to do a free and fair election. I think it's a collective stupidity if we do not revert back to ways. So that's the first issue. So Abuja School is bringing for our conversation now. How should we action plan? How can we drive a reform of INEC? Because we still have we have at least 3 more years for the election. It's enough time because we have seen the government has shown a precedent of being able to complete constitutional reform in less than 2 weeks. They can do electoral reform in less than 2 weeks. So that's an issue to keep in mind. Go first, okay. So, go ahead. So you can see the paper, we try to argue why we think this is important and how it can be done. You say it is part of the constitutional power of the president to make appointments like this, but nothing in the constitution precludes the legislature from amending the constitution to divest the president of the power to directly appoint members of the federal executive body under section 152 of the constitution. Even the constitution does not provide any blanket provision against the legislature creating the federal position and conferring on anybody else the power to appoint such a position. This is unlike the US case, where Article 2 of the US Constitution reposes on the president with the conference of Senate the appointment of officers of the US. We mentioned some of the cases. So the model of independent, non-partisan electoral management body recommended by the Ways Committee is borrowed from South Africa. The appointment follows nomination by the public of persons who are considered credible and capable. The nominations are interviewed and reviewed by a panel chaired by the Chief Judge of the Constitutional Court, with one member each from the Human Rights Commission, the Commission on Gender, Equality, and the Public Prosecutor. The panel recommends a minimum of persons and sends to a committee of the National Assembly. The National Assembly recommends to the President to appoint members of the Commission. This process succeeds in reducing the influence of the President in the entire appointment system, but still retains the President as a formal appointing authority. The constitutional provision is that the Constitution can take away the power to appoint the INEC chairman and members of the INEC away from the President. But such removal, is it necessary and required for free fair election? The most critical challenge for Nigeria's quest for political stability and development is getting a fair and credible process that ensures free and fair election. At the heart of this challenge is creating a model, an institution of election management body that is effective, independent, and impartial. INEC is a regulatory agency, and INEC must have 3 levels of independence. First, what we call decisional autonomy. INEC must be able to be free to decide. 2, of course, fiscal autonomy. INEC has its budget. I think now it's like a first-line charge. They have their budget, so they're not encumbered much, okay? They're not waiting for releases. I think they should do that. And then, of course, administratively, INEC appoints the ad hoc staff to decide who they want, nobody imposed. So what is missing now is that independence that comes from, this line, keep going, that comes from, so we try to articulate how we can arrive at this system we're talking about, but okay, go ahead. Okay, so the next one. So then, go ahead, yes. So these are all the processes we outlined, how we can get there, yes. Okay. And again, the key is that we don't think that commissioners should be eligible for reappointment. So we give them one flat tenure, 5 years, whatever it is. So at the next election, they're not even due, or 4 years. See, we should have, people talk about institutional memory. Yes, the staffers are there, but commissioners are decision makers. They should be insulated from the investment or expectation of reappointment. Why this works well is that, except Nigeria goes back to one tenure, let's say one tenure presidency, but since we have 2 tenure, it's always good to insulate decision makers from expectation of reappointment. Next slide, okay. Now, the second issue, and I really pointed about this, if you look at we group our problem into 4 categories. The first, we talk about INEC. How do we ensure that INEC becomes truly independent? Now, independence does not necessarily guarantee complete 100% performance, but independence helps to insulate and immunize decision makers from undue influence. The rest, it can control through administrative procedure, rules, processes. And I want to emphasize here that one of the things that must happen in the next electoral system, the INEC laws are very incomplete. You see, law will just say INEC should do this. It does not stipulate how it should do it. INEC is a regulator, and there should be, regulators are high on procedure. Due process means that how decisions are made are articulated. People know openness, transparency, how decisions are made. That's very, very important. And so we are arguing, in line with Ario's argument area, INEC should be institution that has administrative law procedure. So, for example, if INEC has to make a decision around a political event, people outsiders will know how they will make the decision. They should know how they vote. Again, look at the central bank that regulates finance. The central bank monthly monetary review is done by voting, and they publish to you in newspaper how each commissioner voted. By 5-4, 3-2, INEC, CBN agrees to return the MPR, or agrees to. So that is what we call rule-making on record. How should INEC be making rules? Nobody knows, like a dark room. INEC has agreed. How? INEC is a regulator. INEC has to have clear rules. The political parties should be there to make interventions, and they are recorded, and INEC decides on clarity that this is the purpose. Number 2, INEC should have, for example, election results. Electoral Act says INEC can reject the results. Is that also? But there's a procedure. INEC has to develop a procedure so that when you are collecting results, you can trigger that procedure, and INEC will pause. Look at the US election. As developed as they are, look at how many cases that are in the court defining eligibility to vote, how long votes can be counted, whether some states can delay counting to 2 days, 3 days. These things are being discussed through the electoral body. They will hold meeting, decide, vote, and publish. Based on that process, you can go to court to challenge them. So for me, INEC is totally, has no capacity, has not developed procedures for managing the election. And that's why we're having problems. That's why the courts are struggling every day, deciding what the court shouldn't decide. If INEC had a quasi-judicial procedure, what the courts will be looking at is simply, did INEC follow their rules? Bingo, off. If INEC does that, that's their right. You go and do election. But today, there's no rules, there are no records. The second issue is primary and sponsorship of candidate. Ario, in the video we showed about Ario ago, Ario made a point that the INEC should be hard on political parties. If I say, use the word, to say force them. Now, look at the transition. The Supreme Court has been very, varying since the 1980s on whether the parties should be regulated. The Supreme Court started by saying, no, don't do that. Then I say, yes. So if you look at the last decision, the Supreme Court is still confused as to whether parties should be left to manage themselves or to what extent parties should manage themselves. And so, if you look at the 2023 Electoral Act, it tries to create some sanity by saying that you have two options of direct, indirect primaries. And saying even indirect has to be democratically, but it's not enough to say so. Lay out procedure. And that's why we think that maybe it's time now to create a political party registration commission like Uwais recommended. Because of our over-bureaucracy, people don't want too much. But INEC has proven not to be focused on regulating political parties and campaign financing. INEC is not doing anything about it. So our recommendation is that there should be more express laws or rules that tells you how a candidate should emerge. Yes, the parties will choose their candidate, but the parties must have a guideline. For example, in the US, it's clear how the parties do their primaries. The courts do not impose on them, but they don't make up the rules as they go. The rules are set. Where there will be Congress, where there's primary, everybody knows 4 years ago that Iowa will do a caucus, that New Hampshire will do a primary. And these are the primary goers. Everybody knows. So they don't leave it to party chieftains to say, this is our candidate for election. Even when Trump was doing 70% against, what's the lady? Haley. They kept the game on until each place, you see that she got 15% of the votes, until they run down, because there are rules to run down. Even when Biden stepped down, Kamala Harris, they had to do some delegate through. So the point is this: there must be clear rules to guide parties to be democratic. You don't just say they should be democratic. How? There's need for those rules. Next slide. Okay. So the third issue we're going to look at for consideration, okay, is we talk about judicial management of electoral disputes. We have come to a point where we have to acknowledge that part of the crisis of the electoral system is now residing with the courts. And there are three areas we want to look at. Of course, judicial corruption is bigger than us. It's an elephant in the room. It won't be solved through electoral reform. It has to be solved through a comprehensive reform of the judiciary. There's no question around judicial corruption. But we are more concerned with jurisprudence of election. And two areas. First, I think that those who drafted the rules of electoral petition rules made a mistake. They should align those procedures to the Evidence Act. We have seen cases where, for example, you ask somebody to front load all evidence, he's going to use all everything, and he has 12 days after election to go and file the petition. And INEC will not give him the documents. If he doesn't file it, no case. He goes and files it, and it turns out that maybe after filing it, the court gives an order asking that INEC should produce. INEC produce it, the court receive it, and then they said, no, it was not filed What kind of nonsense is that? A court ordered evidence, and the evidence came. That was the case of Kogi. So there's no need to realign the evidence procedure for election cases. Elections are like any other cases. There should be no reason why courts should overlook clear evidence of electoral malpractices under a very perverse technical rule. Secondly, judicial officers should issue judicial directions. Why should you have INEC, IRF? Results on IRF shows collected in real time, shows that this party scored 4%. IRF is supposed to be, as the court said, Supreme Court says, oh, IRF is not a collection system, but that's true. But what's the IRF? IRF is a system that gives you proof of actual counting, because they count at the polling unit, they sign off, is that also, and they upload. Collection then happens, and somehow you overlook the real-time capture of the actual result and use the many hours, many days collation with alterations and mutilations on paper. I have not seen where that happens. Now think about elections even in India, bigger than us. In a day, results are out. It's electronically transmitted, real time. People know the result. In the US today, maybe how the result will go, we don't know. It may be midday, before 10 hours, before 5 hours voting started, they will declare result. There's no magic about this. How can you overlook the result captured real time? And then you allow results captured hours after with Biro. I have seen something like that. So I think there's need for judicial direction that says, look, the whole essence of election petition is to restore credibility back to voters. It's not for judges to do fanciful sorcery to declare winner or no winner. It's simply for the courts to say, get us back to where the voters voted. It's not the court who elect candidates. So there must be the need now for judicial officers, the Chief Justice of the Federation, or the Federal Court, or the Court of Appeal, to issue the right directives to judges. Your job, you can't see the clear, if you see clear result, that's what it is. And the reason IRF should, by law, be made to be determinative. Results are collected from polling units, they are posted, and that's the result. There's no ritual of, imagine what's called collection. People will not carry with leg, go to local government capital, go to state capital. You go to five stages, then finally somebody will count it, decide whether he will accept or not, and then will declare whatever he likes. Then 2 days, 4 days after, INEC starts reposting IRF. I mean, that's ridiculous. In the election today, results finished, they are still changing IRF. They're changing IRF. So what mockery is this? So I think this is now time to deal with this once and for all. And don't forget where we started from. Anybody deceiving you that this country is not at the verge of collapse is a joker. Any country who says that if we control this election to 2027, we will remain a country is joking. I can tell you that, there's something that happened in the Bible, some of us who are Christians. It says, Jesus was telling, it says, if the things that were done, if we are doing, it's not enough, it's not what was done in Sodom and Gomorrah. That they were wiped off. So how dare you think you will survive? The things that made Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger collapse are not more than what we are doing today to ourselves. So somehow we wish that if we issue a press statement, we will divert the tragedy. That is wrong. The final, go back. So we talk about judicial management. And again, that's another one I missed out, is around. So the final point we wanted to talk about is, apart from INEC, yes, we talk about the primary process, and then, just 1 second to get, so yes, then electoral finance, I didn't mention about campaign finance. Abuja School went to court and got an order that INEC should issue directives for campaign finance. We saw the debate over Aisha Yusuf and the Labour Party, whether their records are good or not. Now, did these confusions abide because there's no guideline, comprehensive guideline for campaign finance. We have taken up with INEC. We won the case at the High Court. INEC has no guideline. INEC is doing nothing. INEC is only doing election. The day of election, they rig it and go home and call civil society again to talk about planning for the next one. Everything they ought to do, they never do. INEC is not just corrupt, it's incompetent, thoroughly. How can you have a law, the Constitution says that illicit funds, campaign finance from outside will not come to the country, number one. Number two, Electoral Act talks about limits, individual contribution and spend. Still, INEC has no process to ask parties to keep accounts. Now look at what happens elsewhere. Before you declare as a candidate in the US, for example, when you declare, every moment you issue a statement, how much you have received, how much you have spent. Now how do you know money laundering? How do we track criminals who are investing in election? Okay, how do we even track money used to bribe officials? So you hear every year that to run for Senate in Nigeria, you need 10 billion. People tell you to run for. That 10 billion is not spent on the media, it's not spent on logistics, it's not spent. This is money perhaps used to corrupt public officials for electoral purposes. How can you track it if you don't have a comprehensive reporting mechanism? Because that reporting mechanism is what triggers whistleblowing. In fact, once you require parties to enter those entries, they will make mistakes, which is easy forensically to trace what they're doing. No rules, no processes. So that's something that we must, go to. So to conclude, the idea, I wish all of us were here when we played that Ario. Maybe before we start the conversation, we'll replay it again, because that Ario video, tells us a few things. So what Abuja School wants to do openly is, we want to solicit our comments, views, and then we'll develop action plan and go to the former heads of states, generals, everybody. The idea is, the first step, there are two options for Nigeria now. The option of revolution now, Deji. The option of revolution will go and storm the Bastille. Take out the guys and take over, masses. Or the option of a national consensus on real electoral reform that can guarantee that when the government is not performing like today, the people can be confident that they can remove that government. Because if people are not confident that they can remove a non-performing government, whether at the state level or the federal level, then the incentive for them to engage in extra constitutional, criminal, violent actions is high. The people countries that have fallen into disrepair and chaos are not, they're not children of Satan, and we're children of God. The difference is that the system keep failing and refusing to be reformed. We are grateful that Nigerians, nobody likes to die in Nigeria. We are good people. We don't want violence. We don't want problem. That's why when we do some 2 days of protest, we go back and eat. But we can't continue to trust our luck. This is now time for serious leadership on this matter. And Abuja School wants to bring together a coalition. I'm ashamed that the opposition parties are doing nothing about electoral reform. It's a big shame. They are running around on how to be president. But on the evidence of Edo, evidence of Imo, evidence of 2023 presidential election, some of you here are even more cynical. I don't see how anybody can think about sitting on an incumbent government with the kind of electoral system we have now. I want to end there and say thank you for coming, and we are going to have a few people who will speak, and then we'll have